is start with yourself and find all the information that you have at home that you can use to get started on your genealogy. Okay, so that's my screenshot picture that is out on the web. It's not completely current, but it's a few years old. But that was me about 10 years ago. And then what you want to do is you want to start gathering all the information that you have at home first so you can get started with yourself and work backwards. Now, I would imagine as we're all alive, we probably have birth certificates, and most of us will have at least one marriage certificate, maybe more. We may have some educational diplomas or school reports. I have some school reports from my years at the grammar school in Ormskirk in Lancashire. I also have diplomas from my bachelor's degree and my PhD. I don't have much by the way of sports achievements awards. My granddaughter has a lot because she was in gymnastics for a long time and now she's in diving. She's 16. But even people like me who have no real sports achievement awards because we didn't have a lot of school sports when I was in high school, I at least have something that says I got my life-saving certificate. So that's kind of like a sports award, but that's probably as close as I will get. We all have a lot of photographs. And what I have found in my family is from about 1900 onwards, when people got little brownie cameras and took little snapshots, I have a lot of very casual photographs. Prior to that, I have some studio photographs of earlier ancestors. The earliest ones I have go back to around 1860. Prior to that, we didn't get the normal photographs that we're used to, you know, the little carte de ville or, you know, little postcard size pictures. But if you're really lucky, you may have some old daguerreotypes that are hidden, but you can't display those. You can just look at them occasionally. If you've lived at many properties or many houses like I have, I will have the addresses of all the places I've lived. And since I've been married to my husband, we have owned a house for the past 45 years. We owned 2 houses in New Jersey, then one in Southern California, and then this one that we live in now up in Northern California. But I also have addresses to the places where I lived as a child. Now, my father was a vicar. That meant he did not own his own house. My mother bought a house after she retired, but that was the only house they owned. They had tied houses. But obviously, I'm going to have some church and religious records. My marriage was in a church. So instead of using a vital record marriage certificate, I can use the actual one from the church. And in England, they look just the same as the marriage certificates. I'll show you an American one, they're different. I have a baby book. My sister has a baby book. The good thing about my baby book was that it had all the addresses listed of where we lived. And we moved 4 times. When I was 6, we moved to a little village where my parents stayed for the rest of their lives. But I didn't always know all the addresses of the places where we lived. There was one place in Leeds I didn't know the address. So I looked in my baby book, found the address, gave it to my sister. She has a son that lives in just north of Leeds. So when she was visiting him, she went and took a picture of the house. So I got a picture of the house. So that was what that was useful for. And then somebody in your family probably immigrated. In the case of my husband and I, it was us. So we both have immigration naturalization papers. And I will show you one. Once you've looked for yourself, you need to look for your parents and your grandparents. Now, most people have a father and a mother. They may not have always lived together their entire life, but they were certainly together 9 months before you were born. And then you will have grandparents on both sides of the family. So you'll have paternal grandfather and grandmother and a maternal grandfather and grandmother. And I don't know if those people were alive when you were a child. My paternal grandmother died when I was 4, but my mother's parents lived longer. I think my grandfather died when I was about 12, and my grandmother was actually at my wedding and died when I was about 22. So I actually knew my mother's parents much better. My father's parents, his father died before I was born, never met him. But you want to gather the information on your parents and your grandparents, and you want to work backwards, one person at a time or one couple at a time. And I think when you get back to your grandparents, you can work on those 4 generations in the beginning, because that does give you a start. Now, I did give everybody a pedigree chart, and I realized it was a 4-generation pedigree chart. And what I'm showing you here is a 5-generation pedigree chart. You can see if I point here, that's where you put yourself. And there's no space for your spouse, but then there's space for your father and your mother. The men are always at the top and the women at the bottom by convention. So it's easy just to stay with the convention. And you can put down the birthplace and date, the wedding date and place, and the burial date and place. D stands for death, B stands for birth, and M stands for marriage. And the W is for where. So there's 2 lines. And then you can do the same thing for your grandparents and your great-grandparents. And I've given you a 4-generation chart. This one goes back to great-great-grandparents because it's a 5-generation chart. But the one I passed out was 4 generations. And when you've thought about, those 3 generations, there's other people you want to think about. In your generation, you may have brothers and sisters. I just have 1 sister. My husband had a brother and a sister. In my parents' generation, my father had 2 brothers, 2 uncles, and my mother had a brother and a sister, so we have an aunt and an uncle on that side. When I go back to my grandparents' generation, on my dad's side, there were 2 girls and 2 boys, including my grandfather. On my mother's side, my grandfather was one of, and on my dad's side, my grandmother was one of about 6. And on my maternal side, my grandfather was one of 9, and my grandmother was one of 4 that lived. So we do have more people that I can look at in that generation. The earlier families are larger. Our current families are quite small. And then you look at cousins. So it's all these people. And the reason you want to look at these relatives is they can sometimes tell you stories. Now, I find that sometimes the stories get a little bit mixed up, and they don't always get them completely right, but there will be some truth in the stories, and it's up to you to figure out exactly what the truth is and what's not the truth. And you can use online records to help you do that. But if you're going to ask people, start with the oldest first, because they're the ones that could end up, at this point, getting COVID and die, which we don't want to talk about, but they may get dementia, or they may just pass away from some disease, and then you miss it. I also gave you a family group sheet. It doesn't look quite like this. The one I'm holding up is a little bit different, and that's the one you got. You can't really see it, but at the top it gives you information about the husband and the wife, and then later down it gives you enough room. On the sheet I sent you has enough room for 12 children. I don't know any families these days that have 12 children. So once you've gathered all the information about your parents' generation, and you'll probably find a lot of home sources, including pictures. And then you can look at your grandparents, and you should have some sources at home. I at least have a marriage record from my grandmother. I have newspaper clippings of their silver wedding and golden wedding, pictures. But I'm not going to show you the English vital records, because I think what you're going to be looking at are American vital records for the most part. Maybe there's one person who could go back to England. Now, this is for somebody called Larry Keith Michael. This was a client. I did this for a client. He was born on the 11th of March in 1934. His parents were Lloyd Ainsworth Michael and Lois Isala Baker. And those were the names of the parents. This is the birth record. He was born in Des Moines, Iowa. And this is where, or at least he was born in Iowa. And that's where the family lived, because this is a Iowa State Department of Health birth certificate. It tells you he was a legitimate child. He was born at full term. He's not a twin or a triplet or anything. The order of birth is not given, so he's probably the oldest child. And then it tells you that the father's an auto mechanic and that the mother is a stay-at-home wife, which in the 1930s was very typical. And that's basically the information that you get. But what period of pregnancy did patient first contact you, the physician? 4 months. Obviously, she waited till she got past that first trimester to do it. And this record says for genealogical purposes only, because I got it for a client. So that's what a typical birth certificate would look like. This is a marriage certificate, and this is from Vermont, and I got this online at ancestry.com. The people who are getting married are Wayne Kelly Bernier and Heather Glee Jostler, maiden name Bulger, which when the name of the bride is not the same as her maiden name, you know she's been married at least once before. It could be more than once, but we don't know that, but we know she's been married before. Now, for both parties, you notice that if you look in the first box for the groom, the name of the father is Kenneth Bernier and the mother is Beverly Emerson, and they were both born in Vermont. In Heather Jostler's case, we've got James Harvey Bulger and Donna Glee Lagar. So Glee is probably a family name, that's a clue. And they're both from Massachusetts. Now you will notice that the couple registered to get married on the 10th of December in 1904. Their wedding date was January the 1st, 2005, and they got married in West Topham, which is where they live. And you notice that they're both living at the same address, so they were probably living together before they got married. They waited till January the 1st, I suspect, because they were both working and they could save the marriage tax for the year of 2004. You also notice that they were married by Virginia S. Dago, who is a reverend and a pastor. Now, if you see a name of a pastor or a priest on the marriage certificate, you can Google them and see if you can find which church they belonged to at that period of time. And sometimes there are city directories, or sometimes there's just information out there that you can look. You may be able to look her up in the 1900 census and see what her job was and what her church was. Or if there's any city directories, you can use that, or Google, and you can find out. There is an address given, so it's in Springfield, Vermont, so that should be helpful. So that's, I picked this one because it was typed and nice and easy, and I could get hold of it. I've used it before in classes. Now I'm looking at a death certificate from Missouri, from Willow Springs in the county of Howell, for Sarah E. Baker. Her date of death was the 13th of, it's right here, 13th of April, 1924. She's married to John H. Baker. She dies when she's 45 years, 9 months, and 2 days of chronic myocarditis with uremic poisoning as a contributing factor. She's been ill for 3 years. Now, this is before they had stents or heart surgery. So if you got heart disease, you kind of had to just do the best you could. And it's not uncommon for somebody to die young in this time period. Now, of course, if somebody had a problem like this, they would probably put stents in and give them a few more years. She was born on July the 11th, 1874. She was born in Houston, Missouri. Her father's name was John Henley of Rolla, Missouri, and her mother's maiden name was Eliza McFarland of Houston, Missouri, the place where she was born. The informant on this death certificate is Lois Baker, and the father's name is Baker, so it's probably her sister-in-law, maybe one of her husband's sisters. She died in Willow Springs, Missouri. And one of the things you find on American death certificates is they give you the name of the cemetery, and it's right at the bottom here where I'm pointing. And it's called Solo Cemetery. I would Google that and see where it was located next to her. And sometimes you can look at Find a Grave and find the information. But if you can't use Find a Grave, then you have to come up with a different solution. But sometimes Find a Grave will actually have some of these cemetery records on. And if there's a stone, the stone will be shown. So that's just examples of birth, marriage, and death certificates. Now, these are school reports from England, and I don't show you mine. I show you people in my family. The one on the left is from Wheatley Boys Park School, and W. Aspinall is my mother's brother. He was in a class of 36 people, and he was top of the class. In other words, he's a brain. So's my mom, so's my sister, so's me, so my grandchildren and children. What can I tell you? It's nice to be smart. On the other side, you see a report from the British Boys School where my dad went. That's for Douglas Bell. He didn't do very well in this year. He was number 49 out of a class of 56. He was not the good student that you can see it says 56, 49, and he didn't get very good marks. But later on, he actually did go and take his A-levels at night school so he could go to divinity school and become a vicar in the Church of England. Now, this is a sports activity thing from my uncle. Now, I want you to look at this logo here. It's got a castle. It's called Doncaster Wheelers. They were a group of people that used to get together and do bike rides. My uncle Harry, or Bill as he was called, had sometimes rode on a tandem with his friend Sam King and sometimes rode on a solo bike, but they used to do road biking, you know, do 30, 40-mile trips. And they had a little club for this. Now, I want you to look at that logo because now I'm showing you two pictures of him. The one at the left is when he was in the army in World War II. He was actually a truck driver in Africa. He wasn't on the front line. But the one on the left was taken when he was in his 60s and he was staying with my mother. And you can see that the logo on that jersey is actually the Doncaster Wheelers logo. This is my mother's sister, Ethel, who was 7 years younger than her. The picture on the right is taken on her 95th birthday when there were 16 family members in the south of France on holiday, including her, and we took her out to dinner on her birthday. And that shirt I bought her for her birthday, she's wearing it there. And the picture on the other side, she looks about 4 or 5 years old, and she's just wearing a little dress and a bow in her hair. And it looks like that picture was probably taken in a studio. So she got dressed up to have that picture taken. But that's when she was a child. This is when she was, as I knew her, at the end of her life. And that was actually her last birthday because she died a few days before her 96th birthday. This is the only family photograph I have of this family. And I believe it was taken on their silver wedding anniversary. And as they were married in 1907, that would be probably 1932. This is my grandfather, Sam, and my grandmother, Maud, at the front. Bill is in the middle, Ethel is at the right, and my mother is the one with glasses at the left. And the fact that everybody's there makes me think it was a special occasion. And as you see, Bill still has hair until he goes into the army, and then he shaves it off and does the Yulbrenner cut. He sort of did it before Yulbrenner. I have some church records from Ethel. This is her baptismal certificate. It gives her birth date of August the 11th, 1916, and her date of her baptism, October the 4th, 1916. And this was at the Church of St. Mary's, Wheatley, which was very close to where they lived, and it was the family church. The little program over on the left is the confirmation service. And Ethel got confirmed on the 12th of May, 1932. So she would have been almost 16. She was still 15. It was about 3 months before she turned 16, but they used to do confirmations every 2 years. So when you were 15 or 16, you got confirmed. And that date, the date on that tells me when she got confirmed. Then I have some church record order of service for people's death. The one at the far side is for William Henry Aspinall. The one in the middle is for my dad, Douglas Hubert Bell. And the one on the far side is for Ethel Sarah Aspinall. And you see she died on the 28th of July in 2012. Her birthday, her 96th birthday would have been the 11th of August. So she died a couple of weeks before her 96th birthday. And then I'm also showing you an immigration certificate, and that's mine from 1974. And yes, I look a lot younger there than I do now, and thinner too. And there's a US passport, because obviously I have a US passport. Now, once you've gone through all your home sources, you really need to do a couple of things. The first thing to do is determine your goals. Now, goals are not set in stone. They're just what you're going to be working on when you get started, and you can change them over time. And you do need to change them over time. The other thing you need to do is set up a system to organize your materials. And there's a couple of ways you can do it in hard copy. You can either put them in binders or you can put them in file folders. I like file folders. A lot of people like binders. And I do keep a lot of stuff online, particularly census information and my family tree. I use Roots Magic, but there are other family tree software that you can use. There's several out there, and I can certainly talk to you about it if you're interested. But let's just talk about goals. Some people really want to just look at their surname line, and if you want to do that, you can do a Y-DNA test at Family Tree. The line you know the least about. So if one side, they're all Mormons and you've got it pretty much settled and you don't know much about the other side, but maybe your parents separated or divorced when you were young and you don't know much about your father or your mother, the one that you didn't live with, you can start working on that line first. Some people want to join a lineage society like a, DAR or SAR or some of the other lineage societies. It's a little bit of a different sort of pattern to do because you need to document the ancestors that will get you into that society. And you'll probably also need to join a chapter and work with somebody who can help you. All your ancestors is a very big thing, or all your children's ancestors, even bigger. Now, if you want to do all your ancestors back to your grandparents, that's not a bad way to start because you can do a lot of that at home and then you can start looking for records. And we're going to talk about census records, so we can start looking for census records. But when you get back to your grandparents, you've got 2 sets of grandparents, you've got 4 sets of great-grandparents and 8 sets of great-great-grandparents, you're going to have to pick a line to work on and pick 1 or 2 and then just do them for a bit. If you get stuck, try another one, do a little bit of thinking. You may want to get back to Civil War, War of 1812, Revolutionary War, if you've got men that served or lived in the country that long enough. You might want to fill in the gaps for a book you're writing. If you're writing something about your ancestor, that's when you find out that, oh, I'm missing this census, or I don't really have enough information about this. Maybe I could find something else. I'll look and see. But that's the kind of thing you need to do. And you need to have modest goals. You can start out, say, I'm going back to my grandparents because that's where I started. And then after I got back there, I started to pick and choose. Side first because I knew more about them, and then I went to my dad's side. And you do need to reevaluate your goals all the time because you can't work on more than maybe 2 families at one time. And then you do so much and then you say, oh, I need to send off for these certificates, so you send off for some certificates and then you go and take a couple of weeks break. So you might just want to do a bit of work on another family while you're waiting. And that's basically what I had to talk about getting started. So at this point, before I set up my next presentation, I'm going to ask you if you had any questions on this part.
I don't think I got you said you sent out these charts?
Yes, I did send out the charts and I hope you got them. Now I need to get back to my screen share. I just need to get back to it. I seem to have lost it somehow.
Uh-oh.
Do I still have screen share?
I think so. Let me check.
So Diane, if you didn't get the handouts, there is an email from Kathy, but she can always resend them to you if you
You still have screen share. You still have.
I'm trying to get back to where I was actually. See what we need to do.
I sent you one, Diane.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm back now.
Okay.
If you didn't get, just let people know if you didn't get the handouts because you should have got the handouts. So now I'm going to do the part on census. Are there any more questions before I get going on this? Okay, then I'll just get going. This is beginning your U.S. population census and state census research. Now I'm going to focus primarily on federal censuses, and I might just talk about state censuses at the end. The years for U.S. censuses are conducted every 10 years on the year ending in 0, and this is a year for state censuses, for population censuses, U.S. population censuses, because they're always putting these ads on the TV. If you haven't done your census, get it in. It was supposed to be done on April the 1st. I did mine on 27th of March.
Christine, are you sharing your screen?
Yes.
We don't see it.
Oh, I thought I was. I don't know why I'm not sharing it. I mean, I pulled it up. I thought I pulled it up okay, but maybe I didn't. I've got to. This is the one I was trying to share. Screen sharing has failed to start, so that's a problem. So I need to hit share. It's still failing to start. Do you want me to get out and start it again?
It's up to you if you want to. I don't think that's a issue because it says here that you can share the screen.
Yeah, no, I thought I was sharing it.
Here we go. Oh, nope.
No, I'm not there. I'm trying to share. I got it going in the beginning because I had it started, and that was what I tried to do again. Ew, what's going on? I don't know what's going on here. Sometimes it, maybe I'll try to close a couple of windows. That might be better. I'm just trying to close.
There we go.
I was just, sorry about the noise. I just want to screen share. Is it sharing now? Are you seeing my screen?
You were seeing your desktop.
That's okay, that's fine. I need to get, I'm gonna have to move this out of the way a little bit so I can get to the. Sometimes it's when I try to go from one thing to the next, I find that I get lost.
There.
Okay, is that good now?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Let's get started again. So we're talking about the US Census. The US population census is enumerated every 10 years, and it's enumerated on the year ending in 0. So this year we had a very poor little census, but I did fill it out. The first census was taken in 1790, and it's been conducted every 10 years since then. In 1790 to 1840, they counted the head of household by name and the number, sex, and age of other household residents. And sometimes they broke them out by color, black and mulatto versus white, because if they lived in the South, they could very well have had slaves, and if they lived in the North, they may have had servants. The first every name census was conducted in 1850. So that's why I said on this presentation, we were going to talk about the censuses from 1850 to 1940, because those are the every name censuses. At the beginning, I don't go back to the others. There is a way of enumerating people with the earlier censuses, but it takes more work, and it's not really a beginner thing, it's intermediate. So we're going to study these particular set of censuses. The first family I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go back from 1940 to 1900. Then I'm going to talk about another family, which I'm going to go from 1860 to 1900. Why is census research important? Because it's conducted every 10 years and the mandate was to enumerate every US resident on a given day, the chance that your relative and ancestors are living on that given day and were enumerated is close to 100%. Occasionally you find people get skipped, and occasionally you find people get enumerated twice. Sometimes they may be like in the Navy, but then they also get enumerated on the Navy ship and they get enumerated at home, but those kind of things can happen. But most people are enumerated once. And every name census is one of the first record sets that genealogists research. Which censuses can I research? They're open to the public 72 years after they are conducted, which means that the last available census for research at the present time is the 1940 census, which was actually opened in 2012. It became available on the 1st of April, 2012, and within 3 months, the census had been crowdsourced and indexed, and by August, there was a full index to this census. Prior to that, you could you could browse the census, but you really couldn't search it. The next census that will be available is the 1950 census, and that will come out on April the 1st, 2020. It will probably be a little bit bigger than the 1940 census, but I suspect it will get indexed in 3 or 4 months, just like the last one did. And I think Family Search was in charge of it, and you could sign up to do some of the indexing. The only census that is not available is the 1890 census, because it was damaged by water after a fire in Washington, D.C. It was stored in the basement of a federal building. In the 1920s, there was a fire. They put the fire out by throwing lots of water on it. But unfortunately, the census in the basement just got waterlogged. And by the time they found it, it was moldy. Now, if this was 2000 or later, they would have been able to dry it out and take pictures of it to store. But they didn't do that. So all that's left of the 1890 census is about 6,000 households. And there is a veterans schedule that's available for 1890, but the only ones that are extant are from halfway through Kentucky to the end of the alphabet for these states. Now, that was supposed to be an enumeration of Civil War veterans who's fought on the side of the Union. But let me tell you, who said that? I just wanted to, can you mute yourselves, please? Because I'm getting background noise. If you had Confederate soldiers, they may have put themselves on the schedule and they'll write a line through it, but you'll be able to read it. Oh, it's worth looking. Now let's look at what we can learn from available censuses. The information on every name census, you always get the names, the gender, and the color of all members of the household. At the beginning, it was white, black, and mulatto. They add other things later on. You get the age, but in 1900, you get the month and year of birth. So if you can find that census, you'll get a lot better idea of when somebody was born. Now, if the age and the month and year of birth doesn't match, I would probably go with the month and year of birth. You get relationships of members of the household to one another, but it only starts in 1880. Prior to that, there were some rules given to the enumerators that you had to log people in a particular order, and you can always look up the enumerator instructions, but it may not have been followed exactly. Sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't, but at least it gives you an idea. But prior to 1880, you don't know if those kids are stepchildren, if it's a blended family. You know, sometimes you get a clue. Sometimes they use, the wife's kids still use their own name. Sometimes they change it to the name of a current husband. You never know what's going to happen. When you get the census, you will find out if they were born, which state they were born in, or if they weren't born in the United States country. Now, in the earlier censuses, it may name a territory as well. You'll get the occupation. Now, the male head of household is going to have an occupation. And usually any males for 15 or over will have an occupation if they're not in school. If kids were in school, it will tell you whether they were in school during the census year and how many months they were in school. Usually they were in school most of the time unless they got sick. Sometimes you get the value of real and personal property. And if you look a couple of pages forward and backwards on the census, you'll find out if there's any nearby neighbors. And if your family lived in a small community, or in a certain area of a city, you may find other relatives living nearby, or you may find that the boy next door marries your ancestor's daughter. If those things happen, particularly if you're talking about farms that are close together. Additional information you get from 1880 onward is a street address, which is written sideways on the left, just inside the left-hand margin. In 1900 and 1910, you get the number of children born to the marriage and the number living, which can be quite useful because sometimes some kids just don't show up on the census. They live 2 or 3 years and die, but you can track that those kids were born if you know that there are other people in the family who don't make it to the census. In 1900 to 1930, you get information on immigration and naturalization. And in 1910 and 1930, you actually get military information. They don't give it to you in 1920 because a lot of the people who served in World War II had not been demobilized in time for the census, so they didn't ask that question in 1920. Websites with US federal population censuses are Ancestry.com. Now, if you don't have your own copy, you can look at it at the library or family history center. The library copies do not have family trees, only the personal copies have family trees. You can look at familysearch.org, which is free at home. You can get, when you go into Family Search, if you haven't been onto it, you need to make a login and a password, and then you need to write it down and remember it, because every time you go into that site, you will need to log in. You can say you want to stay logged in for 2 weeks if you're on your own computer. Find My Past also has a censuses, but that is available at family history centers. And if you live in Santa Clara, it's available at the Santa Clara City Library. And Heritage Quest is often free with library cards. Now, I don't know if you're in Half Moon Bay, you probably are. And I know I can get Heritage Quest free with my library card. You have to go online to do it. But the censuses are actually ancestry censuses. They look very like the ancestry censuses, but it's not quite as user-friendly as Ancestry. It's got a few of the features, but not everything. You can look at blank census forms. They're available for every name census. And we're not going to look at all of them in great detail. However, I'm going to show you 3. 1850, because that's the first every name census. 1880, because it's the first one where heads of households and relationships to heads of households are shown. And the 1900 census, which is the first of the very rich 20th century censuses. Now we're going to search for, this is the first family we're going to look for. The head of household is John Radford, who was born somewhere between 1870 and 1880. I do know the exact date, but this is how I looked for it in the beginning. I know he was born in Canada, which is helpful because that cuts down the number of people. And I know his wife's name is Agnes. What I did was I went onto Ancestry, did a census search, and chose to search the group of 1900 to 1940 censuses together, because I knew that the first census I was going to find him in was the 1900 census, because I know he was in the 1881 census in Canada, and there's no 1890 census in the United States. So this is the search box at Ancestry, and this is how I filled it out. I put his name in, but I also checked the boxes for the surname that says exact, sounds like, similar, or sound X. So if there's a slight variation, I'll find it. John, exact, or sounds like, because it may just be, I didn't put, the other thing you can choose is initials, but I don't choose that. I knew he was born between 1870 and 1880 in Canada, so I chose 1875 and chose ±5 and chose Canada. I didn't say exact to this country because it just didn't really seem as though I needed to. If this doesn't find him, I will add more stuff. So when I did this search and then hit, I may have put in his spouse's name. You can't see that right now, but I would have probably put in the name Agnes. And I got 3 of the first 4 results are the 1940 census, the 1930 census, and the 1920 census. And you will see that in all 3 of these censuses, he's living in Santa Monica in the Los Angeles County of California. He saw the light and moved to the good country. Good, nice weather. If I added Chicago as a living place, I got the 1900 census. And it tells me he was born in Canada in July of 1873, because that information is on the 1900 census. It doesn't just tell me his age. It tells me he arrived in 1886, he was married in 1895, and he lives in Chicago, Cook County. So those are the 4 censuses I know about. So let's start at 1940 and go backwards. Now that you really can't see that very well, but what you can see is there's a yellow line and a green line, and those are actually the Radford family. Let's blow it up a little bit so you can see it more. You can see he lives on 12th Street at house number 322. House is owned. The house value is $6,500. It's not a farm. His name is John Radford, and the wife's name is Agnes. See the little X next to John? only on the 1940 censuses, they put a little X next to the person who gave the information, which means John Radford himself gave this information. You can see he's 66 years old and his wife's 67 years old. She's actually 4 months older than him, but probably if they took the census, say at the beginning of June, and his birthday's in July and hers is in March, it'll make her look a year older, but she's 4 months older. She was born in England and he was born in Canada. And under that city thing, it says they lived in the same house in 1935. You go on further, you know, they're not at school. John worked 40 hours a week as a mechanic in the aircraft company. He was a worker. He worked for 52 weeks of the year. I expect he got a week's vacation. And he made $2,200 that year, which was lower than what he made in 1930. But he was probably just working as a mechanic at this point. He may have had a higher position earlier. And then as he neared retirement, he may have not been in that managerial position. He may have got just a regular position because they had to get somebody else in. Because at 66, he's actually over retirement age, but he's working a little bit longer because he's still healthy enough to do it. So now let's look back at that's what you see from the 1940 censuses. And what you can see here is the headings are actually written out for you on Ancestry so you can see them better than you can on the actual census forms. And that's what makes Ancestry easier to work with than Family Search. Now we look at the 1930 census, and once again you can see these two lines, and there we're looking at it again. They're still living at 322 12th Street. It's dwellings 70, family census 70. That's just the enumerator's number in the order in which they did it. We have John and Agnes, husband and wife. The home is worth $8,000. I think it must have dropped in value during the 30s because of the Depression. They have a radio. That was a question that was just asked for the first time then. It means they have enough money to buy a radio. No, this is not a farm. They're 56 and 57. They've been married they were married at 21 and 22. You can find out information about where they come from. You see that John, who's the one in yellow, was born in Canada. Both his parents were born in England. He came to this country in 1885 and he was naturalized. He's an engineer at this point, so he has a higher job and he's making more money, $5,394, which makes me think that as he was nearing retirement, he was given a little bit lower level job. It was probably to try and get him out, but he stayed anyway. And the second line is Agnes. That's the one in green. She was born in England. It says her father was born in England and her mother was born in Scotland. And she came over in 1890, and she would be naturalized along with her husband. Now we're going back to the 1920 census, which is the first census when we find them in California. Now we see we have 5 people in the house, although Maud is not colored in green. She should be, and the yellow line is slipped up. But we still have John A. Radford, his wife Agnes, and then 3 children. The eldest son Arthur, who is 23, the second son Charles, who is 21, and the youngest daughter Maud is here. There's another daughter that never came to California with them. Now we get the year of naturalization, 1919, and it was actually in Chicago before they moved to California. So they obviously moved somewhere between late 1919 and early 1920. Yes, we find out that he's Canadian with English parents, that she's English. Now it says her mother was born in England. Her mother goes backwards, and Agnes's mother goes backwards and forwards between England and Scotland. You will see he's electric consultant. John Arthur, the wife has no job, and Arthur is a lieutenant in the US Navy. And the other son's not working. I don't know whether I think he got ill and he died fairly soon afterwards. He didn't live very long. But Maud got married and the other daughter got married in Chicago. This is a blank sheet for the 1900 population census, and those are the headings. And you see each person's place of abode in July the 1st, 1900, who in the family. And you've got color, sex, month of birth, year of birth, age, single, married, or widowed or divorced, number of years married, number of mother of how many children, and number of how many living. And then you've got the nativity and the citizenship and the occupation and some stuff about education. Okay, so this is the 1900 census for Cook County, and this is the same family. I've blown it up. You can see John A. Radford is the head. He was born in July of 1873. He's been married for 5 years. That's in the column right over here. And they have 2 children who are both living. And the 2 children are enumerated. There's Arthur W., who was born in 1896, in February 1896, and Charles K., who's probably, I think it's Arthur William, and I think it's Charles Knight, which is Agnes's maiden name. And he was born in June of 1898. And they have a servant, Emma, who is, well, about 24 years old, 23 years old, and she's single. So that's the family. You get the information. Now Agnes's mother is born in Scotland. She goes back and forth between England and Scotland. I expect she was born in Scotland and lived most of her life in England. And I think he's a superintendent. I think John Radford was an engineer, and he probably was a superintendent. He was an electrical engineer, and he was working in that field. You saw some information about the marriage, and I printed off the Illinois Marriage Index, where you can get the information about the marriage sufficient. I would have to pay money to buy the certificate, so I just use the index. You see, the spouse's name was Agnes Eliza Knight. That's why I think that Charles K stands for Charles Knight. They were married on the 30th of January, 1895 in Cook County, Illinois. I don't know if they were married in a church or married at the city hall, because I would have to get the marriage license to find that out. And it is on a family history film. I could look at the film and see if it's there, but they may have pulled it because now Cook County wants you to buy the certificates from them. But at least we get the marriage date, and it sort of jives with what's on the census. John Arthur Radford, whose birth date was 22nd of July, 1873 in Canada, died in Los Angeles County on the 30th of October, 1952. So he will be in the 1952 census, but that's the last one. Now, I could buy this death certificates from Los Angeles County, but I probably won't. I mean, if I was there, I'd just go in and buy it, and that would be it. But I know it's him. The mother's maiden name is Blastock. That makes sense. Father's surname Radford. And that's the right date, so I know that's the right person. And then Agnes lived a little bit longer, and then she moved from the house they lived in Santa Monica to live closer to her daughter Maud, who was married, until she died. She didn't live with them, but she lived near them so that she had a support network nearby. To find the 1910 census for the John Radford family, because I haven't shown you that yet, I had to search for the census by itself, because the global search over the 5 years didn't bring it up, at least not in the first 2 pages. Because there are 2 little mistakes in this census, and just those 2 little mistakes made it hard to find. The surname was written as Redford, not Radford. That's a mistake on the census, and I looked at the census and it's really written as Redford. And Agnes may have been meant to be Agnes, but it looked more like Agnes with a U, not an E. So when I tried to search for Agnes Radford instead of John Radford, I didn't find them. And just those 2 little mistakes made it harder to find. But when I searched for the census by itself, then I've only got 1 census, and I'm looking for John Radford's with a wife named Agnes, and it came up on the 2nd page. Well, it made it a little bit harder to find this census, but I was successful in the end. And this is now you see, when you look at that first line, it definitely says Redford. And when you look at Agnes, it does look more like a U than an E. So those are mistakes are real. They've been married 15 years in 1910. Remember, they got married in 1895, and now they have 4 children living. Arthur is 14, Charles is 12. You only see Marjorie on this census because she's 9 in 1910. If they moved in 1919 to 1920, she'd have been 19 or 20, and she stayed behind because she had a serious boyfriend who she was planning on marrying, and she didn't go to California with them. Maud was young enough to go to California, and they have a different servant now, but they've always had a servant when they were in Chicago. And it looks like they live on Gage Road, and the house number is not given. It will be in this column, but they haven't given it. So this is the last census for this family. Now, okay, so that's the rest of it. Just okay. Now Agnes's mother is born in England. She's born in Scotland, England. I think she's probably born in Scotland, moved to England when she was a young child, but I'm not sure. But when you see something like that, you will look in the English index to see when she was born, because you've got a, you can find out when Agnes was born, and then you can look back at the mother, but you look in the English index, and if you don't find it, you look in the Scotland's people. And this is Arthur. He is somebody who became quite famous. You saw him as a lieutenant in the 1920 census, and I pointed that out to you because he was a career Navy person. He actually rose to be an admiral in the Second World War, and eventually he became the Joint Chief of Staff for Eisenhower during the years 1953 to 1957. He was in the United States Navy. He lived to be about 77 years old. He was outlived by his beloved wife, Miriam Radford, who lived to be 102. He had a first wife who he divorced, but she's not in his obituary. But I know about her because I've done all the research. But that is his tombstone in Arlington National Cemetery, and it's not very far from the Kennedy grave. It's in that main part. So just so you know that why I picked that family, because there was somebody famous in it. And yes, he's my third cousin twice removed. Our common ancestors, James Radford and Mary Smith, who were born in the late 1700s. Arthur is descended from their son, John Radford, and I'm descended from their son, Thomas Radford. It goes down to Henry Boer Radford, John Arthur Radford, Arthur William Radford. On my side, that's my second great-grandmother, Eliza Radford, my great-grandfather, William Dickinson, who's the eldest child of this couple. And then this is my grandmother, who was one of 4 children of William and Harriet Dickinson. And then my mother was Esme, and that's me. So that's that part of it. And at this point, we're third cousin twice removed. If anybody's got any questions about that, now's the time to ask them before I start talking about the next family. Okay, we'll go on. Now we're going back to 1850 to the first every name census, and I'm just showing you a blank form here. You see it's got a line number, dwelling number, family number, the name of every person, your usual place of abode on the first day of June 1850 was in this family. You get age, sex, and color. At this time, color could be white, black, or mulatto. Profession, occupation, or trade of each person over 15 years of age. Value of real estate owned. Name, place of birth, naming the state, territory, or country, because this early you have territories. Married within the year, at school within the last year, persons over 20 years of age who cannot read and write. And then the last column is what I call a deaf and daft column. It says deaf and dumb, blind, insane, idiotic, pauper, or convict. Now, I'm going to start at the 1860 census because I'm talking about the family of Leland Stanford, who is maybe somebody you have heard of. And because I didn't have my own family to talk about, I picked somebody famous. I actually picked this because the first time I gave this talk, it was to a group of people from Stanford. So that's why I picked Leland Stanford. Okay, so the heading's a little bit, the only difference between the 1860 and the 1850, you get the value of real estate and you get the value of personal estate. You get one extra column, but otherwise it's the same. This is the Leland Stanford family that I find in the 1860 census in Sacramento. He is listed as 43 years of age. He's a merchant. He has $15,000 of real estate and $50,000 worth of personal estate. He was born in New York. And S. Stanford is a relative. S. Stanford is only 23, so he may be, it's a female, so it may be a niece because he doesn't have any children. And she has come out to probably act as a housekeeper for him because he's not married and he's a merchant, so he needs somebody at home to do the work for him. So he's probably paying her something. And then we've got Anne O'Keefe, who's a servant from Ireland. It's a very small household. This is before he's married. He's living in Sacramento. I think he was part of the government, and then he became the head of one of the railway companies. So let's fast forward to 1870. The family is a little bit bigger. Just trying to make sure. The color choices now are white, black, mulatto, Chinese, and Indian, which means American Indian. And the family is much bigger. Leland Stanford has married Jane. Jane Stanford is also from New York. Now Leland Stanford at 48, he was 43 before. He's probably shaved a few years off his age to keep him closer to Jane's. He's the president of the Central Pacific Railway. He has $30,000 in real estate, but his personal property is $653,000, over $500,000. That's a lot of money in 1870. They have one child called Leland, who's 2 years old. Jane and Leland were both born in New York. Leland Stanford Jr. is 2 years old, and he was born in California, most likely in Sacramento. There's a couple of other people living with them, Annie Lathrop and Henry Lathrop. Now, Jane's maiden name was Lathrop, and they're from New York, so I think they're relatives. Annie is probably a sister, a younger sister. Henry may be a brother or he may be a nephew, but he's working as a bookkeeper. So he is actually working for Leland Stanford's company as a bookkeeper or an accountant. Notice over in column 19, it says, if you're a male over 21 and a US citizen, put a check mark in that column. You can see the two men in the family, Leland Stanford and Henry Lathrop, have check marks in that column. Now let's look at the servants, because servants are foreigners, all foreigners. We've got John Kelly, who actually has $25,000 of personal property, which makes me think he must have made some money in the gold rush, or maybe he just saves. He's from Ireland, and his parents were born in Ireland. But look over in column 19, there's a check mark. That's rather a backhanded way of finding out somebody is naturalized if they're foreign born. So John Kelly was born in Ireland, but he's definitely been naturalized because there's a check mark in column 19 saying he's a US citizen, male over the age of 21. Margaret Scott, who was born in Nova Scotia, and Mary Kelly, who was born in Ireland, who may be a relative of, or maybe the daughter of the John Kelly above, don't have any check marks in column 19 because they may be naturalized, but they're women. The other person is a coachman called Bryant, who's 40 years old. He's also from Ireland. He is also naturalized in column 19. So all the males in that family are either native-born Americans or naturalized Americans. And of course, the column doesn't apply to women or to young children. And that's why there's no marks in those columns. But that is the first way of finding out about naturalization. So if they're naturalized, then you can at least try to look for the records. You may not know what court they're going to be in because they were only in the federal court after the middle of 1906, but they may be in any state or local court. The 1880 census was the first every name census. And now you will see a column here, relationship of each person to the head of the family, whether wife, son, daughter, servant, boarder, or other. That's in column 8. And that's new. They've changed the age a bit. Age at birthday, if under 1 year of age, give it in like 3/12 for 3 months or 10/12 for 10 months. I couldn't actually find Leyland in the 1880 census. I looked, but the page was missing, and I suspect what happened when they filmed it, a page got skipped or blurred, and then they put it at the end. But when I looked on Ancestry, I couldn't find it. But I've got a synopsis here, which really tells you a little bit about the family. They're living in San Francisco, California now. Leyland Stanford says he's 55 years old. He was 48 in the last census. Jenny Stanford, as she calls herself, not Jane, was 40 10 years ago. Now she's 42. It's wonderful how they changed their ages, but Leyland Stanford goes from 2 to 13, so he's legit. The kid's usually legit. The parents shave their ages. It happens. It tells you that they were father's birthplace, mother's birthplace in New York, not head. Okay. He's occupation is a capitalist. He's married. He lives in San Francisco. This is the 1880 census. Sorry, I couldn't show you the actual census, but that was all I could find. So that's what I used. But at least you get an idea that the family is still 3 people, a husband and wife, and 1 son, age 13. Fast forward to 1900. I don't know how much you know about the family, but young Leyland died at 18. They took him on a trip to Europe, and he died in Europe. And when they no longer had a child, they decided to put their money into Stanford University in Palo Alto, and they bought up a ranch, and that's where the university was started. At first, it was free to people who lived in California. Now it's definitely a West Coast Ivy League with high prices. But in 1900, the only person left in the family is Jane. Leyland has died. She's now a widow. She's 71. She says she was born in New York, but her parents were born in Connecticut. She had 1 child, Leyland, who died. She has 5 servants living with her in her mansion to keep her very happy. The first person is George Debenham, who's a butler from England. He came over in 1890. He had never naturalized. He's an alien. Layla Rice, who's her secretary, is 34. She's from Wisconsin. Parents from Pennsylvania and Ohio. So she's an American. So she's obviously good at writing. And so she's a secretary and probably oversees the rest of the staff, the maid, the cook, and the housekeeper. The maid is a German girl who is actually a 40-year-old widow. She doesn't have any children, so she just got herself a job. It's probably quite a cushy job working for 1 person. And then you've got 2 Chinese people, Wing Wong and Wing Young, or should I say Wong Wing or Young Wing. They're 39 and 36. The eldest guy is married for 16 years, but I'm sure his wife lives in China and he's the cook. They've both been in this country since 1882, i.e. 18 years, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, they're not able to become citizens. They're aliens, but they have decent jobs in the house. One's a cook and one's a housekeeper. So that's really the end of the population census part. I need to tell you that censuses do contain errors because we don't know who supplied the information, with the exception of 1940, when the X showed that John Radford supplied the information for that couple. The indexes aren't perfect because you've got optical scanning, and because censuses you're looking at handwriting, they have to change the scanning characteristics when you go from one census enumerator to the next. So it can sometimes be a little bit tricky, and sometimes they get a little messed up on the first page or 2. So they do try to be careful about it. But Ancestry does optical scanning indexes, which, you know, depending on the handwriting, may be good or may not be so good. You need to search on spelling variations of your names because sometimes, you know, we saw Radford as Redford. So you look for the correct spelling first, but if you don't find it, you've got to be a little creative. Some of the things I would do is search for the wife's name because Agnes is less common than John. So I could try that. If one name is difficult or different, like Leyland, you can probably go with Leyland Stamford. It's probably easier to find than Jane Stamford. You can sometimes search for a child with an unusual name. If you've got a John and Mary and one of the children is called Agnes or Jennifer or Margaret, they're more likely to be easy to find. And the other thing about working with a child, especially a young child, the age is likely to be within a year of what you believe the age to be. Now, when you're talking about Leyland Stamford and Jane, you could see that they did not necessarily stick within that guideline. Wasn't their thing. They were trying to shuffle their ages to be closer together. And you've got to remember that some people use their middle names. Some people use their first name and then their middle name. I was working with a family the other day, and she went from being Elizabeth to Mary, and then I looked at this birth index and it said Mary E. So I said, okay, she's Mary Elizabeth, but she likes Elizabeth some years and not others. And of course, Leyland Stamford, we're talking about somebody we only know by Leyland Stamford, but his first name is Amaza Leyland Stamford, and he never used that first name. He always used that second name. And you can print off blank forms to read the column headings, but if you work on Ancestry, you might not need to do that because it's pretty easy. But I do have blank census forms on my computer that I can actually look at if I'm having a problem with the names. And when I've done classes for beginners, I've usually printed these off and given them to them so that they can look at the headings. And now we've learned what we might expect to find in the US population census. So I would definitely say that you can go to Ancestry and start looking from 1940 back. Now, if you're old enough, you may be in the 1940 census. At this point, you would have to be 80 to have been in the 1940 census. And it'd be extant. But if you're not in there, then maybe your parents are, and they may or may not be married. If you've got older kids in the family, they might be in the 1940 census. If not, you have to look for the parents before they got married. But you can have happy hunting during the census. Does anybody have any questions on the population census?